We're gonna get started, being mindful of your time. Just a couple of quick elements of housekeeping first. There's water over here if you want some. I'm also going to pass around a sheet. You can just sign up so we know how many people attended. That would be helpful for us. And if you put your email, we might send you a survey and see how we did. That would be great too. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker, Professor Ann Oldorf-Hirsch, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication here. She conducts research in the Human-Computer Interaction Lab. Broadly, her research focuses on information sharing as a form of communication in online social networks, with a specific emphasis on the features of communication technology that alter communication norms. She teaches courses on the effects of mass media, social media, and new communication technologies. She's presented at international communication and information science conferences, and her work appears in journals such as Mass Communication in Society, Health Communication, and Social Media in Society. So please join me in welcoming Professor Ann Oldorf-Hirsch.
You want me to do that? That's okay.
Whatever easier.
Well, I teach very large lectures where I wear the mic, so I'm used to being wandering, but I'll do my best to kind of pivot. Okay. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for being here. I know that there's a separate nuts and bolts. So with my presentation, I tried not necessarily to go into the specifics, like how do you set something up or change a feature or something more technical. But I welcome any questions that you have. I put together some slides of just my experience with using social media in kind of the academic realm as a faculty member, some of the things that I've gained from that, ways that I found work to work with that. So I'll go through these, and I think there'll be plenty of time. I may not end up talking even the whole session, so I absolutely welcome questions in between. Feel free to stop me or afterwards about anything, to clarify anything, or if you have a sudden idea about what's going on. So this is, I pulled mostly from my Twitter. That's really where I'm active, so I have my little graphic here of my profile. And I can just kind of say as a background, this whole social media thing for me came from my own personal interest in it. I was in grad school right when Facebook was basically taking off, and so I've just kind of been following it along the whole time. Ended up making it the thing I study, but I also use it pretty heavily personally, which is an interesting balance, right? So I just want to talk a little bit about how I use social media, and I think there's a lot of, how do you do it best? What is the most effective, what's the right way or the wrong way to use it. And there's definitely best practices, things I'll go in the end of, like, how do I sort of summarize all this stuff and say what are some ways that are useful, and to kind of get into that. But I think in the end, everyone uses it kind of differently. And so I can talk a little bit about my experience and how I use it. One thing that comes up is there's so many social media platforms, like where do you go, right? And we have everything that ranges from LinkedIn, which is considered very professional, to something like Snapchat, which is very casual. It maybe feels like, oh, that's not something I incorporate. And so just to kind of break it down, I'm on pretty much all the social media platforms, but I use them all differently. And I think that's one thing, is not feeling like you have to be on every single one in every single way, and that you don't need to necessarily communicate on all of them with all the same people or find people on all of them. And so really, Twitter is where I do everything that's work related. And by work related, I mean like things relating to my research, my field, my area of study, or just higher education broadly, teaching, everything that kind of goes with that. And so I've kind of isolated Twitter as a space where I really focus more on kind of like professional work-related content. And I'll go into what that is, but I kind of keep it there. So that's really where I am kind of outwardly as a public person. I do use the others, but much more personally. So just an example of not feeling like I need to do everything everywhere. So I use Instagram. I love Instagram, but for me it's a personal space, and I don't try to make any kind of a professional sort of presence there. But I do like using it to see how it works, to understand what goes on there, what are the norms, what are the features, kind of keeping up with things like stories, how does all that stuff work, how do people use it. Facebook, of course, has been around forever, right? So that's something that I and many people have just grown into over the decade or more, right? And so this is also a personal space for me, much more with friends and family. So again, I don't do much there work related. I do follow UConn there, and sometimes I'll post something, that has to do with that. But really just kind of how it relates to my life in terms of connecting with family or friends. And I am on LinkedIn, so that's a question, like LinkedIn seems like this is the professional one you should be on. For me, and I think this is kind of true about academia in my experience, that it just doesn't play as much of a role in academia as maybe other industries. And I could be wrong, but that's been sort of my experience with this. So I do have a page there. It's almost more of a search engine landing page. So you search my name and yes, I am there, and you can find out the basics of, I work here, and I've worked there, I've done this, and this is who I'm connected to. I don't really post there, and again, everyone can be different with this. So this is just kind of how I use these different platforms. There's other ones too, of course. I mean, YouTube, right? That's where I find all my how-to videos. Like Snapchat is sort of the, like, what are all these crazy features on Snapchat? So that's why I'll focus on Twitter, because that's really where I tend to have found this network and this space to kind of make connections and have collaborations. So again, so the way I think about Twitter in ways that I found to be really useful, I'm sorry if this text is a little bit small, I admit I was trying to squeeze a number of things in here. What I do on Twitter, so first and foremost, is just really tweet about my own research, my own work-related activities. And so that feels a little weird sometimes to sort of promote myself and be like, here's this great new study I did. But it usually has positive feedback, right? People are interested, and engagement rates on Twitter aren't super high. It's not like hundreds of people respond to these things, maybe a couple people. But it's nice to have a little bit of that feedback. And so I tweet, like if I have a new publication coming out, if I'm gonna be presenting at a conference, I tweeted about this, like, hey, I'm gonna be part of the first UConn Social Day. If I'm just going to a conference and wanna say, hey, who's there, what are you working on? Teaching related things, stuff that I'm doing in my classes. I teach a social media class, and we have our own hashtag that students, we all kind of came up with, Social Huskies. So if you look at that, that's kind of what's going on in our class. So that's all kind of work related. So I do mostly that. I do also tweet out other stuff, and this is really where I find I connect with people. And so I'll find other research, and I'll talk about where I kind of keep up with research to tweet about. But one thing I do, of course, is follow the journals in my field, follow other researchers in my field on Twitter. And so then I see what they're doing. And so it's a really nice way to say, hey, my colleague over at Ohio State just published this really great study on social media use, right? And one thing I try to always do is find the authors and just have the little @, and then that way they're tagged. So then it just starts a conversation, and then they might message me back and say, hey, thanks for retweeting this paper, or oh, I didn't realize you did some of the same work, or hey, are you going to be at this conference? And so I found that that's a really cool way to connect. And so then it also means I don't have to come up with everything. I'm not creating a ton of content. It's kind of pulling in what other people are doing as well. I follow outside of academia. I try to follow things that are relevant still to my work, or kind of expand my work, or give new ideas to my work. So for me, that's like social media and technology blogs and websites, and things like TechCrunch or Mashable, the things that are much more industry focused, but are maybe about new apps or features or technology coming out. I follow Twitter lists, and so these tend to be lists that people have created where it's kind of two things. One, there's just hashtags. So one hashtag I'm part of is SM Profs, so social media professors. So I find that hashtag, and then when people are tweeting things that are related to that, then you can kind of follow that hashtag and find other people in the same field. So sometimes it takes a little digging to figure out what those hashtags are, but there are also lists like I know I'm on a list that's like Connecticut-based professors. And so somebody's actually compiled a list that you can go to and subscribe and say, here's all these people that have been added to this list, and I can kind of follow them. So it's a good place to find like experts in certain areas. Tweets from conferences is really big. So most conferences now will have their own hashtags. And so I'll tweet while I'm there, and it kind of lets other people know I'm there. But I can also tweet about the conference, and it's also nice if it's a conference I can't go to kind of see what's going on and still keep connected. I do use it as a space to ask questions. So I think recently I asked, sometimes it's very theoretical, like, is there a term for this thing that we all do on social media? And then you can start a really great conversation. Or someone can even be like, I've been wondering that too, we should investigate that. And then also just jumping in on those discussions, right? So if someone says, what's a really good way to analyze this type of data? And then it gets hashtagged or put on a list, and it sort of makes its way to my feed, and I can say, oh, I used this, this platform one time to do this, and then that can kind of be a way to connect as well. So all of these things for me are really about connecting with other people through this. And I do also put a few, I say personal, which I don't mean like overly private or intimate, but just, I think there's still, it's always nice when there's still a little bit of personality too, right? Like it's not all just work. So I'm a pretty avid runner, so sometimes I'll talk about running, like, oh, I was running in this great new town in Connecticut, or here's this really interesting thing I saw, or, you know, I was so stressed today and going for a run really helped me kind of refocus or something like that. So I like when there's a little bit of that personal kind of sprinkled in too. So here's how, I don't expect you to read any of the text that's on here, but just to give an insight of like how do I do all of this at once. So I use TweetDeck. There are a number of different platforms, and I think in the nuts and bolts, they might go into this. There's different platforms that you can use to track multiple different sites. Something like Hootsuite can let you look at Twitter and Facebook and Instagram kind of all at once. But because I'm mostly operating in this way on Twitter, I use TweetDeck, which is Twitter's own product. And it just lets you add however many columns you want of anything. So I have my own feed. So this is actually everyone I follow. But then I've got all these different feeds. So there's a hashtag SciComm evidence, so that's a hashtag that one of my research group tweets on, so then I can see if anybody else is using it. The SM Profs hashtag I was mentioning, so I can kind of see what other people in my field are doing. I have some of those conference hashtags, so whenever I have conferences coming up, I start following the hashtags. So International Communication Association is in May. So kind of seeing is there any news or who's going or what's some of the stuff that's presented there, some of the other conferences. And so you can add all different kinds of columns and you can listen in on topics or you can follow the hashtags, you can follow a list. It's really useful and it can be overwhelming, but you can always start, it's really easy to delete columns and be like, I don't want to look at this anymore. But it's a really nice tool. So that's kind of how I manage all of this. So just to talk about, hopefully to kind of inspire some of the things that I have gained from this, because I know that sometimes social media can seem really superficial or just kind of unimportant in ways that it's like, oh, it's for fun, it's for entertainment, it's not necessarily that useful. Although I think we've really started to shift that and realize the power that it has. And so just to talk about some of the kind of the connections and opportunities I've gained from using it. So this was sort of a joke, I'm wearing all of the name tags from all the conferences I've been to, because someone was like, I dare you to wear all of them, so I posted that as kind of a, like this would be one of these more personal jokes. But in reality, so often when I go to conferences, I connect through social media while I'm there, and so I usually put my Twitter username right on my name tag, because then people can kind of find me later. But I also have started experiencing this weird phenomenon when people walk up to me and be like, hey, I follow you on Twitter, or hey, thanks for retweeting my paper, or hey, I saw this thing that you posted, it was really helpful, and it's weird, but it's also really cool. So I've met enough people just from the Twitter connection, and then we sort of see each other in real life at conferences, or vice versa, we meet at a conference and then we can follow each other online and kind of keep connected. Or presentations, right, so I put my username down here, so it's nice to, when you're watching someone present, sometimes be like, oh, what else do they do? Let me find them, see what they're up to. Talks, so I gave a talk at the Connecticut Science Center about social media, well, at the Hartford Public Library. That talk led to meeting someone who runs the Digital Citizenship Summit, and that was in West Hartford that year, so I got connected to that community through having posted about this talk that I got. I got invited to a symposium at Ohio State that I knew the organizer of really through talking on Twitter, right? And so they were like, we just want to have a really small workshop of people kind of in the new comm-tech field, and they were just thinking of, you know, who's kind of in this space, and it just made me more salient, I guess, to kind of be active in that space, for them to think of me as somebody to potentially invite for that. Again, not that I'm so special, but just that kind of visibility, right? Saying like, here, I'm putting myself out there as someone who does this work. I teach a social media class, and I had found this really nice model of social media engagement. So I tweeted about it, I found the author of the book and said, hey, here's a really great model of social media engagement by Gina Luttrell. She's a public relations professor. And so she tweeted back and said, hey, whatever day you're presenting this in class, I'd love to call in and like give some expertise on like having developed this model. So just things like that. Same with the textbook I used for that class. This is another social media professor at University of Louisville, Karen Freeberg. she tweeted that she'd written a new book, and I said, that's great. So I got a copy and I use it for class. So it's a great way to find information. Some of it's more just social, like at conferences, meeting up to go for runs. That's something that more informally happens maybe through social media. Like, who's gonna be here early and wants to go out for a run in the morning? So it was a picture of one of our runs at a conference in DC. And then ultimately it's all kind of led to, I now help run the communication and technology divisions. Twitter is part of the International Communication Association. So again, just being like, hey, you're active on Twitter, you get what's going on, like, come help run the Twitter account, right? So just sort of a service position, right, kind of helping with that, volunteering. So just some of the opportunities that I think are really cool that to think back, like, most of this happened because I was just on Twitter, I was just tweeting about things. So best practices, kind of the things that I follow. So one of the things at the beginning I had said how I use the different platforms, and that's something I explicitly kind of thought out one day. Because it's really easy to just sort of scatter yourself on these platforms and not really think about what is going or sort of who's there or who'd be interested. So I did actually sit down one day and explicitly say, okay, Twitter is gonna be for work, right? Instagram is gonna be a more private space. Facebook is gonna be for family. And so it's not like that took very long, but I just kind of made this effort to sort of think about, like, what do I want to be doing with all these social media platforms? So I think the best practice is to make a social media plan, and it can be really basic, not like you have to sit down and create a year-long editorial calendar of all your content or anything like that. But just that kind of idea, like, what is your goal for being on any social media platform? Because there's this expectation, like, we need to be on these platforms, we need to be doing stuff, we need to be using them, but why? Like, what is it that's gonna be most useful for you? And I think that makes it most useful for you, but also makes it clear for people who are following you about why you're there and what you're doing. And so within that, creating relevant content, and again, that doesn't necessarily mean that I sit down and I'm photoshopping beautiful graphics or anything like that, but just like, what would I tweet about? And so I did give this some thought, right? So I want to tweet about research as it comes out. I want to make sure I'm following tech news and be able to maybe have something to say about it here and there as an expert, right? So what is some of the content that I can create? What are some of the things that I can add value on about the type of research I do, or how I do research, or sometimes it's like how I teach, or how I deal with things in the classroom, or just like, what are all the things that, I mean, we're all experts on something, like, what is it that we can kind of share knowledge about on this platform? Curated content is really anything that I don't create, but am sharing, right? So I would follow, like I said, I follow the journals. So most of the journals in my field will have, like, they'll email you out the table of contents every so often. And so I can kind of scan through that and say, oh, Social Media and Society has a great new piece on how we use mobile phones or whatever. And then I can post that and maybe say a little something about it, tag the author, go through the whole thing. And then also I do schedule posts, which sounds potentially weird. But sometimes it's like I might get up on a Monday morning and feel like I have a little bit of time to be on Twitter, and then I don't want to just have a slew of like 10 tweets in a row and then go missing till Wednesday night. So sometimes if I find like, here's a cool new set of articles that has come out, or here's some news that's really relevant, I'll actually schedule it out at a really basic level, just so it kind of tweets out more regularly. And it gives you a little bit more of a regular presence. Again, that's kind of up to anybody doing this, but that's something that I find helps me feel like I don't have to be there all the time, but that I do have kind of a consistent presence online. And the way I do that, I actually use TweetDeck, but there's some other tools too if people are interested that will actually find the best times to post, and you just throw it in a queue and it sort of runs on its own with an algorithm. But sometimes I'll just do it manually. So there's like a site called Buffer that I'll use that'll actually let you tailor a schedule, and it sort of just puts it in a queue and goes, which is interesting. So engaging with the community. So I think this is really important. Not just for individuals, but obviously I see this with brands too. It's really easy to post and be like, here's things, and then kind of walk away. But I think it's really important to engage back. So not just tweeting, but also asking questions and saying, well, I'm an expert, but you're all experts too, you know, in something. We all have some topics of expertise, so I do ask a lot of questions there. You know, I'll say like, I don't know the best way to, you know, deal with this, you know, this, I'm trying to develop a study, for instance, and I don't know of a good measure for this, or I'm not sure how to deal with this data, or does anyone have a suggestion for something I could do in the classroom on this topic, right? Replying, when people do reply to me, I'll try to kind of keep that conversation going and not just say, okay, I saw it, and then not respond at all. Retweeting, quoting, and saying something about it. So I'll find something interesting, like tweeting about it, but then also adding my own, like, why am I retweeting this? How is this relevant? And so just having conversations, like actually engaging with the people there, and not just feeling like, oh, I need to post, and then that's kind of the end of it. And I know storytelling is such a buzzword right now, but I think it really is true to kind of tell that, like, have it be sort of a story about, why you're there and what you're doing. And so just trying to be consistent with the content and clear about why you're sharing it, like I said, so that somebody can say, why would I follow this person? Oh, well, they share really good articles in this field, or they have really good advice to give about this, or, maybe they're just interesting, right? Not everything has to be serious and educational, but maybe they have really interesting perspective on things. And so just trying to be consistent about what I share there. So I don't just share everything. It pretty much has to be social media or tech related, even if it is like a personal, something about me and like self-deprecating about how I can't get away from my phone or something like that. And so that's kind of the last point, is showing your personality. I think for me, it always seems important enough to share kind of enough about who you are and yourself so that you still connect with others. And so it's not just this like serious sort of expert feed, but also like, hey, she's also kind of silly, or she also has this problem, or she also, can't stop staring at Instagram or whatever it is, just to kind of connect a little bit. So that's the majority. Oh, and I do have, because I know we're talking about the social media guidelines that are coming up. So I did take a look at those and just kind of making sure you're in line with that. The guidelines, if there are guidelines from a place you work at, but also the norms. And this is something that takes a little bit longer to develop, I think, but like, what is the norm of using Twitter? Like, how do people engage there? Even if it's just things like, not posting 20 times in a row, or making sure that you reply, or kind of coming in onto like, how do you use hashtags? When do you tag somebody? And those are things that I think you learn in practice. But I think it makes it all run smoother and is much more fulfilling when you can kind of figure out what the norms are of if it is Twitter or if it is Instagram or Facebook or whatever. So now that's the end of what I have to say. So I wanted to put my contact info, so email, Twitter, website, but leave time for some questions too, or thoughts, or suggestions, or comments. Yeah.
Sorry. So I run one of the department's social media. So I try to stay away from like being more personal
Sure.
and things like that. And I, Christian health, so I make posts around health-related topics and things like that. And also like what we're pushing out in the department, not only promoting who we are, but also doing related topics and things like that. So I do find a struggle to not make it personal and using I in terms of that way, because you're not speaking on your behalf, you're speaking on the department's behalf.
Right.
And I find a struggle learning just to use that language and keep it consistent and have it not come off like a person is talking, but a whole entire department is talking. So I do struggle with that sometimes. I don't know if you have any suggestions. I don't know if you run other department social media, or just like a personal account.
Yeah, so I don't run a department. Yeah, I don't run a department social media. So like our department, communication department, has social media, and we have a student worker who tends to run that. But I do help run the one for the conference, right? So then it is kind of stepping back, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is different than, you wouldn't make it personal in the same way and be like, I did this today, right? Like it is, you are speaking as the organization, which is interesting, right? So you kind of have to follow their voice and what are they saying.
Keeping that voice consistent is what I try to struggle with. Because there's a certain tone to go with, so you can read one post and read another post and have a different perspective on it, of how to write.
Yeah.
So I just try to be very consistent.
Yeah. Are you the only one who runs the account? Okay. Because I know sometimes when there's multiple people, then not everyone's writing the same way. And so one thing that's really important, like if you are managing a department's account, there's multiple people on it, is to actually write out like, what is our voice here, right? Like what is the tone that we write in?
And eventually be that way.
Yeah, so then everyone's clear, like, well, we write professionally, but sometimes we'll maybe be a little bit witty, but we're not going to get snarky, we're not going to get, so like, where's the boundary of what are those? Yeah. That's a good question in terms of kind of making it personal. I think one thing I see work kind of well is just when you can tie it into like what's going on in kind of current events. So it's maybe not personal to you, but it's like, I don't know if I can think of an example, but if there's something going on campus that's kind of a fun activity, like how can you tie that back with something that has to do with you as well? Yeah, that's, because it is different than saying like, I did this or that, but I think there's still a way to kind of have that personality in there and not just be totally formal all the time, but say like,
Try to make it fun and engaging for students to like keep following us and not put down.
yeah, because I think that's the biggest thing too, is like, why is this relevant to me? Like I think about our department and think about like, why would a student follow the communication department Twitter? Like, yes, they might get information about a scholarship or something like that, but also like, is it just, hey, it's finals week and we know everyone's tired, but here's a, you know, a video about something or whatever that still has something to do with communication in our department, but also kind of connects to like what they're dealing with right then. I think that's maybe the closest.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not far off.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's say, so I'm a sergeant in January, and I inherited social media from before,
Yeah.
and I see that there's a big gap between right now and like the last few posts and stuff like that. Is it better off just to kind of like clear everything out and start fresh?
What do you mean by clear out? Like delete it or?
Well, yeah. So like I think the last post on Instagram was from 2015.
Okay.
So I don't really see the point in keeping older stuff like that. Like what's kind of like the norm for that when it comes to
Yeah.
social media? Do we just start all over and pretend like it didn't exist before? Or?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know that you have to delete it, but I think whatever first post you make, you can kind of make it like fresh start. Because I think it can look weird when, like, let's say somebody was following from 2015 and they forgot, and then suddenly you pop up in your feed and you're like, was I following you? Right? So I don't know that you have to delete the old stuff, because I generally don't think people are going back through really far back, except that would be kind of fresh. So I think just as long as you make that first post, I think kind of acknowledging that, like, hey, we're back on Instagram or something like that. But it's kind of up to you, because I don't know that there's a right or wrong with kind of the old content necessarily. But I think the bigger thing is when you come back, just kind of making it almost like a debut again, so that people are kind of re-aware. People who weren't following would know, like, hey, this is something that's happening again. Or people who were following are kind of reminded about who you are or something like that. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about what do you recommend for, we work in the office, we manage Twitter for that office. What do you recommend for, like following back or letting other people, if we want to grow our followership, but to like, do post back or what's the protocol?
Yeah, I mean, for following back, I feel like, I think as long as, I always, and this may be more kind of my style, but if that account or person is tweeting out stuff that I would find relevant to what I'm doing as well, is sort of where I decide whether to follow back or not. So, you know, like there are grad students I follow back on Twitter, for instance, because they're in that same space, right? They're maybe also tweeting about some of those things. So that's where I tend to think about, like, what kind of content are they posting and what are they using it for? So I don't necessarily follow everybody back, but if it's like, oh, they're either in my field or they are also tweeting about something that's going to be relevant or that I would have a conversation with them about, like, that's kind of where I draw the line about whether to follow back. Yeah.
Are you asking a professional follow back? Because I would give you, I also run a departmental one. If you follow everyone, go back and curate to get rid of the people who just did that to get you to follow them back, because then they'll stop following you. And a lot of them will put weird things on your feed. I ended up with not work appropriate images after following, and my student who was doing it followed somebody back, and they definitely were not someone who was giving content that our professionals needed to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, just from my own experience in running the department, I try to stay away from following back students or even just random accounts. It's great that, you know, they came and followed us, but I don't find it appropriate to follow students back. Even just like on my own personal Instagram, like I'll follow pages. Actually, just happened to me. I followed like a Connecticut page. They posted like really nice photography, and they ended up following me back. So I'm private, so I accepted them. But then they kept flooding my direct message with like advertisements so I would not follow that. So I just try to stay away from following students, because I find it weird, like, oh, I just follow this department to get information from them, but now they're following me back.
Right, yeah, as a
That's kind of like, why do they have to follow the students? So I just put like my perspective, so I follow other UConn departments, and I follow like related student health departments on other universities or other researchers' websites, and I try to follow related topics in other universities, and I stay away from following students or random people I don't know, but also following people in the public who are more popular in the same field of research.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's my perspective.
Yeah, no, that's definitely aligned, because I'm definitely like not representing, like from the Department of Communication account, I would certainly do something different than just my own personal. And when I say students, like I'll follow like the PhD students I advise if we're kind of talking about research. But yeah, no, I think there's, generally speaking, I wouldn't just go back and follow students. Yeah, so it's like grad students that are more like colleagues who are working together on research or something like that, or they're on the job market or something like that. But, yeah.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Shari Pagano. Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
Excellent. She's a professor in the Department of Allied Health Sciences and also director of the UConn Center for Health and Social Media. Her research focuses on leveraging technology in the development and delivery of behavioral interventions targeting diet, physical activity, and cancer prevention behaviors. She has 191 published manuscripts and has had a federally funded program of research for 16 years. And even more for our purposes today, has more than 24,000 followers on Twitter. You've possibly seen her writing everywhere from the Washington Post to the Boston Globe to Times Higher Education, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Psychology Today, and many more. So here to talk to us about the nuts and bolts of social media is Dr. Shari Pagano.
Thank you. I'm actually also celebrating my 8-year anniversary on Twitter this week, so big mouth. I'm curious with a show of hands, how many of you are using social media professionally right now? Okay, so a good bit of you are. And what are your platforms?
All of them.
All of them? Okay.
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, that's what my department uses.
Okay. Others? Twitter? Raise your hands. Instagram? And Facebook? Okay, so there's a mix. And how many people? None? Or just starting off fresh? Okay, so you. All right. Just to kind of get a sense of what direction to go here. So I'll give you some kind of pointers and tips on how to get started, and for those of you who have already get started, maybe some additional insights in terms of like how to build your following, how to create content, and any other questions that you might have. So if questions come up as I'm talking and you'd like it to go in a different or a certain direction, feel free to chime in at any time. So I'm a huge proponent of science communication and social media for science communication because that's kind of really where these conversations are happening. And one thing that you, as academics, probably notice is that in the media, you see lots of competing headlines. I just grabbed a couple of pairs of competing headlines. You know, first there'll be a study that shows something works, and then 3 weeks later there'll be a study that shows this thing doesn't work at all. And so this is what the public has coming at them. And so I really think that there's an opportunity and a necessity for us to be in those conversations to kind of help people understand the nuances of science. Because at times the media, you know, they want clicks and that sort of thing. And so they may not capture the nuance as well as we know we can. And so this is kind of, I think, one of the big reasons why it's helpful for us to be out there. One question I wanted to have you consider, when you think about your specific field, I'm curious who you would say are the thought leaders in that field. So I don't mean like here at UConn or in academia, but just on that topic, if we were to ask your next door neighbor or a random person off the street who's an expert on that topic, who they would say. And you don't have to answer this out loud, but just in your head of like, who would the general public think of when they think of what I study? And I'm curious if the person that came to your mind is actually a scientist or an academic, or if it's someone who's on TV or someone else. So when I think of a few thought leaders, here are 4 people that come to my mind. So Dr. Oz, whether you like him or you hate him, he's definitely a thought leader. He's got a show, he's got millions of followers, he's got the public's attention. Michelle Obama, definitely a thought leader. She did a lot to put childhood obesity on the map. Kelly Brownell, who you probably don't know, but he's a clinical psychologist like I am. He's the reason why we're talking about soda taxes. He's an academic. He's at Duke right now. And actually in Connecticut, from what I understand, the governor is trying to push soda taxes as the first statewide initiative to have soda taxes. In the whole nation, there's some cities that have soda taxes passed, but not an entire state. That whole conversation of why we're even talking about that is due to him as an academic. And then of course we have Jenny McCarthy. None of us are big fans of her. She's the one who sort of threw gasoline on the myth around autism and vaccinations. So whether we like her or hate her, we probably don't like her. She's a thought leader, unfortunately, on that particular topic. So when you think about these 4 people, what do they have in common? They're definitely not all experts from a sense that we think about. They don't have advanced training. They're not all celebrities. Callie Brownell, my fellow psychologist, he's not a celebrity. So what do they have in common? It's really just that they participate in a public conversation on the topic very passionately, very consistently, and using forms of media that the public is paying attention to. And social media these days is a big part of that. And so when we think about influencing thought, the sort of activities that have a high impact are not necessarily the activities that we're incentivized here in academia to put our time towards. Media coverage, commenting, social media, contributing to patient-focused, patient-facing outlets and that sort of thing. Low impact would be pretty much all the things that we do here, which is publish in journals, attend conferences, teach or see patients. So in order to have a voice, we really do have to think about what sort of activities we can engage in to have a voice. And that's where, let's get that slide, social media comes in. It never fails when I do a workshop like this, someone will say, yeah, but like what I do, I don't think the public would be interested. It's really, like, I don't think there's a lot of interest. And so I always bring up the case of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an astrophysicist, and how he got so many people excited about astrophysics, which wouldn't maybe immediately seem like the most exciting topic in the world. I'm a behavioral scientist, so maybe I'm biased, but the general public isn't necessarily dying to learn more about astrophysics, but since he started talking about it, we kind of are. So I think anything can be interesting. It depends on how you make it interesting. So in terms of what you can gain, and I know Anne talked a lot about this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but all kinds of different things that you can gain in terms of visibility, networking, recruiting participants if you're doing research, so on and so forth. So in terms of platform selection, you really want to think about what platform matches your purpose. So are you trying to develop a reputation for yourself as an expert on a topic? Are you hoping to recruit students? Are you hoping to recruit research participants or something else? So I think different platforms will serve those purposes differently. So if you're really thinking about increasing the impact or visibility of your work, I think you can do that with Twitter, Facebook. I'd add Instagram to this list. Instagram and Twitter would probably be a little bit easier to build a following on. Staying abreast of the research literature, I might go with Twitter in that case because there's lots of academics on there that you can be exposed to and learning a lot about the research literature. Recruiting participants, you can leverage both Facebook and Twitter for that. Kind of depends on where participants are, local versus national. If you're looking to recruit, I would go with public platforms like Twitter, Instagram, where whoever it is you're trying to recruit would be found. So if it's students, then maybe Instagram would be a little bit better. But if you're thinking about recruiting for faculty or staff positions, maybe Twitter. I'd throw LinkedIn there as well. And then if you're interested in public health and public health campaigns, then I would go broadly on multiple platforms. even though multiple platforms can be helpful, if you're just starting off, I probably wouldn't start off on multiple platforms. I might pick one and work on that before I would add something new, because that would be a lot of work to do 3 at a time, I think. In terms of personal and professional presence, I think those things should certainly be separated. It's not that you can't be a human and share a little bit about yourself on a professional presence, but I wouldn't sort of use your personal Twitter account to add like some more professional related content. I would just split those up, and certainly the case for Facebook and Instagram. So in terms of social media activities by intensity, meaning the effort you're gonna have to put into it, here's how I would stack them. So LinkedIn, anybody on LinkedIn? Probably a lot of people, it's pretty easy. LinkedIn is really kind of like your online resume. Pretty easy, you're not really expected on LinkedIn to sort of be on there every day engaging. You kind of post your stuff, you can check in once in a while and see what other people are posting, but it's a kind of a low effort and probably low yield social networking site, except if you're in the job market, and in which case it could be high yield because employers could find you. ResearchGate I would also kind of put in there too. This is where people are posting their articles and their science and that sort of thing. But it's just a way to be connecting with other academics, not necessarily the outside world. So I wouldn't think of that as like a science communication activity. But it could be kind of low effort because you don't have to be on there every single day or anything like that. So getting to be more that moderate level, I would put Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, guest blogging, or writing op-eds, because this is like takes a little bit more time and effort to develop those types of activities. And the most highest effort would be if you were to actually start a blog, because obviously if you start a blog, you need to be creating content in somewhat longer form than a tweet on a regular basis if you want that blog to really kind of get off the ground. So you want to kind of match your activity with the time you want to put into it. So taking Facebook, for example, some of you have Facebook pages. Are your Facebook pages for your lab, for yourself, for your department? Which one? Department. Okay, so you're running departmental Facebook pages. So I think a Facebook page is great when you do have a group, like a lab, a department, a clinic, or any group of people. And you can kind of build, in our center we have a Facebook page. So Facebook has pages or groups. Pages are typically public, groups can be public, or they can be private, so it sort of depends. I assume if you're doing this for professional reasons, you probably want it to be public, although you could do a private page if you just wanted it as a way for you to interact with each other. So I would go public unless that was your purpose. But so a page is where you like it, and then you're a person, and then you're following it. Whereas a group, there's usually an administrator who would be letting people in based on, you know, some criteria and that sort of thing. So the challenge with Facebook, and I'm curious of your all experiences, is getting people to follow that page. You have to kind of think of creative ways to get those follows. So you want it to be, I would put it in your email signature, I would be posting it, you know, all over your department or lab. I would have members of your department or lab making sure to promote that, so posting it around to build an audience. You can also share things from other pages, which makes those pages aware of your page, in which case they may follow your page. So if you find similar pages, you could start kind of leveraging content from those pages. I feel like building a following on Facebook is a little bit more effort than say Twitter, where it can just be a matter of following someone and then they follow you back. With a Facebook page, it's a little bit more challenging. I'm curious from you all who have one, how do you build that following and how much does it grow?
When I came to the department, Facebook and Twitter were already up and running.
Okay.
And so I started our Instagram and it succeeded Facebook and Twitter within months.
Okay.
I have more following on Instagram, but that's only because our target audience are students.
Yep.
And they're more likely to be on Instagram, so I realized who is liking and following our Facebook page is more faculty and staff, but also parents and students. And Twitter, I know this is a mix of both, and Instagram is mainly So I mainly focus on our Instagram. Our Facebook has the lowest following. It's very, very hard
Yep.
to increase that.
Yes.
Finding it to be a struggle.
Yeah, it's tricky. So there's a labor of love there. You really have to kind of do that marketing around it. I mean, you could do ads that advertise your page if you want. But you also bring up a good point that your audience matters, and that should dictate your platform. If you want to get students, I probably would not do Facebook because we're not seeing them using Facebook as a primary platform. So that's kind of a really important starting point of who do I want following me, who is my content for, and kind of picking the platform as well as designing your content that's going to be attractive to that population. So if I'm thinking about students, then I really want to kind of understand what do students enjoy looking at. Are they into video, pictures, that sort of thing? Because there's a community and norms in terms of how people engage and what is engaging, and that varies a lot by your target population. So let's say you're going with Facebook anyway, and you have this plan to get some followers for it. You want to plan for steady updates, because one of the things on Facebook, it has this algorithm, and if not a lot of people are paying attention to what you're posting, so you're not getting many likes or comments, in the algorithm, your page is going to kind of go down. And so even amongst, let's say, the 500 people who are following you, they may not even be exposed or viewing what you're putting up. So that's like another challenge to Facebook. I feel like I'm talking you out of Facebook, but I'm just sort of warning you of some of the tricks of it, is that you want to kind of create enough engagement. So one thing I do with our center is I make sure to tell everyone, all of our staff, of follow it, engage in it, because we need engagement to sort of have our posts bubble up to the top. So if nobody's engaging in our content, we're going to be in trouble. So that's the trick with Facebook, is the algorithm can kind of work against you when you're still small potatoes and don't have a lot of engagement. But again, sharing off of other pages that are similar to yours or have great content you can leverage helps with that a lot. So it's just something to think about on Facebook. So here's an academic / clinician who has a really popular Facebook page. So he's an obesity doctor, and he's someone that I follow on Facebook. And he's done a really good job of kind of creating a community around what he does on Facebook. So it's definitely possible. When I pulled this, which was probably a couple of years ago, he had over 13,000 people following him. And he's literally just a physician in Canada whose specialty is in obesity. So nothing famous about him, but he was able to sort of do this really well. And that's something that I do a lot on social media, is I'll look at people who seem to be doing it really well and kind of browse, what are they posting, what is their social media behavior, to see if I can glean any lessons around that could be applied to my activity. And what you will see, regardless of platform, is that people who are like this and are doing really well, they're on there on a regular basis. It's a daily habit. So they always have new content that they're putting up there, coming from different sources, different kinds of content, but they're present on a regular basis. So in terms of what to post, here are a few things that I might post, that I post a lot if you check us out. Definitely relevant papers, and not just my own, anything that I think is interesting and relevant to the topic. So if it's for my center, I have a graduate student helping me finding papers that are just coming out and very interesting that we could share. And you want to make sure that what you're sharing is new. So I would not post papers that were published like in 2016. I'm posting things that are coming out this week. Because with social media, people are expecting, well, think about your own, like your personal social media. You're looking for things that are kind of happening right now. Like you don't see your friends posting a picture from 5 years ago. They post a picture of 5 minutes ago when they were standing in front of the Grand Canyon or whatever they're doing. And you see news that's just breaking. You wouldn't want to read things that are old. So timeliness, I think, is really important on social media. And I also use my feeds as a way to save content that I want to look at later. So I'll post papers, not only because I think my followers will like them, but also because I want to know where to find it later and I don't have time to like download it and save the PDF in the right file. But like, oh, I'm going to tweet this or post it on the Facebook page. and then later I know I can grab it. So I kind of use it like to bookmark stuff. Health information or any information that would be relevant to your audience. So I do a lot of health research, so I try to be a resource. Study recruitment advertisements, always posting that up there. The platform matters on that one, so if I'm recruiting people from a local area, I probably won't tweet that because I know my following isn't necessarily primarily local, but we might post that on the Facebook page or wherever might have like more of a local slant. Job and training opportunities. So if I'm looking for a graduate student, I definitely post repeatedly about that. Be like, hey, I'm taking a graduate student, come work with us in Department of Valley Health Sciences. And then I try to inject some humor and fun into it. Sometimes social media can go in the direction of kind of like being negative or complaining or snarky. You know, we see things that we don't like and we're like, yeah, I can't believe that. So I think it's important to pay attention to tone and make sure that you kind of have like a fun side of it too, and not too, can you believe this happened, or can you believe this happened? And so people might want kind of more of a mix. So in terms of Facebook, you definitely want to update. If you can do daily, that's ideal. But at the very least, a few times a week, putting something up there. In terms of generating content, here's one thing that I do, is I'll set up Google Alerts, and I'll have my graduate students help me with this, on a relevant topic. So we have one page that we run for an organization called Skin Smart Campus, and it's all about sun safety and that sort of thing. So I have a Google Alert set up with certain keywords, and so then I get those emails, and there's always good content in those emails, and I'll use that content to push onto the Facebook page, so we always have something. Table of contents alerts for your key journals that you're interested in, so you're probably getting those anyways. Sometimes I'll look through those of like, oh, is there anything I could post on the page about that? And I talked about following relevant, similar pages and sharing content from those. So we talked about building a following, some of the challenges to that. I think I mentioned most of these things. So let's switch to Twitter. So I'm kind of nuts and bolts around Twitter. Here are a lot of things that you could get out of participating on Twitter. And I can tell you some interesting things that have happened to me because of my Twitter presence. Actually, something just happened this week. I got an email from somebody from Apple, and they said, I'd like to talk to you about your interests. And I was like, that's strange. And so I decided to call up because it's Apple. And she was basically feeling me out for a job. And so having this conversation with her, I'm not going to Apple, but at the end I said, how did you find me? Because I'm like, how does this like random person in Silicon Valley find me? And she said, I saw you on Twitter. And I was like, oh. I hope she didn't see anything, you know. And then I'm like mentally scrolling my tweets. But that was super interesting that someone I don't even know at a major company. And then I was excited because I connected her with some colleagues who were really interested in that job. And so now I'm like really excited for them. They have calls set up. I'm like, yay, I'm gonna send someone from my field to go work for Apple. Like, yay, even though it can't be me. And I can tell you so many stories that are like that have happened like that. Where just like these interesting experiences and opportunities have come my way because people have found me because of my social media presence. So it makes you really also think about the content that you're putting out there and how much of it is really presenting who you are as an expert. Because you really want the world to know like what you're the expert on, and then they come to you. So professional networking is another one. I was just at a conference last week, and there were a bunch of people there that I had only known from Twitter, and then I'd see them and I'd be like, hey, from Twitter. So I felt like I knew more people at that conference than I would have if I did not engage on Twitter. And even leading up to the conference, we were like, oh yay, are you going to hashtag SBM 2019? I'll be there, see you in DC. So it created kind of a much more fun atmosphere around that conference. And there's a funny tweet that I retweeted, and it said, 2009, the real conference always happened at the bar. In 2019, the real conference is what happens on Twitter. And I was like, it's so true. So lots of different things that you can get out of that. So a lot of times on Twitter, when I talk to people around there, they're like, oh my god, like you're listening to like Kim Kardashian and Justin Bieber. Like, well, actually no, I don't follow them and I don't listen to them. Occasionally their name is trending, but it's like, who knows what they're up to. The experience is only as good as who you follow. So your news feed is yours to create. So you can follow Francis Collins at NIH and, you know, professional organizations, colleagues, and other things, and then it's going to be a rich experience for you. I try to not like put too much entertainment into it. Like I can get my entertainment in other places, to not sort of inject that and have that distract me, because I do like to use Twitter for work. So even if I love Katy Perry, I'm not going to follow her on Twitter because I don't want to be thinking about Katy Perry when I'm at work and like thinking about stuff like that. So again, I would like separate those interests so that it's completely useful. Your feed. Interestingly, policymakers are on Twitter. We know of one in particular, one politician who spends a lot of time on Twitter. But they actually all do. Even local legislators are on Twitter, and I make sure to follow them. They don't always follow you back, but they're on there, and there is an opportunity to influence them. So when a health policy goes through, even if it's not in my state, I'll tweet the politician and I'll say, hey, you know, Senator whoever from whatever state, really excited to see that you passed blah, blah, blah in Alabama. This is a public health win. Kudos to you, or whatever, you know, something along those lines, as a way to kind of engage. And occasionally they will follow me back or they'll tweet me back. I'm like, oh, yay. So it's definitely a way to kind of engage at that level where we don't have as many opportunities to sort of interface with policymakers. But it's so important for us to do that. I don't know if you saw, but the new budget that Trump put out has like huge science cuts, NSF and NIH. Probably not going to happen. I'm not too worried about it. But it's kind of one of those circumstances like where our voice is important. So where to start? Luckily, Twitter's free, so you can open an account. When you start, I would make sure that you're setting up your account to have a picture and a bio immediately. Because if you're missing one of those things, you're automatically going to be considered spam to everybody else. Like occasionally I'll see a colleague follow me and they don't have their picture up. I'm like, get it up. Because no one's going to follow you. They're going to be like, oh, it's another like spam person. So you want to, maybe before you start, you could sit down and think, well, what picture do I want to use? And let's just draft a quick bio. And I've changed my bio probably 100,000 times. I'll tweak it here and there. Even just earlier this week, I'm like, yeah, tweak it again. You only get 160 characters, so that's how you have to present yourself to the world. So you might even show that to different people and say, do you feel like this is me? Did I leave anything out? My trouble is like I always want to include stuff like too much. I'm like, how do I just keep it simple? So here's, this was me. Oh, I had a new one, but this is a little bit old, but so my bio is a little bit different now. But here's what it used to be. Maybe about a year, well, maybe 6 months ago, this was my bio. So I wanted to kind of lead with my most prestigious position at the time, which was as a president of my professional society. Then I also want people to know that I'm a professor and what my interests are. And I just kind of threw in a little personal thing because I'm a runner. And then I include one hashtag, which is the hashtag for science communication, because that's something I tweet a lot about. So once you have your bio and your picture, then sign up for that account. And then you're sort of ready to kind of go off and running. 99% of people, their first tweet will be like, hello, Twitter, this is my first tweet. So I'm going to avoid that and just start with something else. It's just kind of funny. You always do that. I started with a Tupac quote because I liked it a lot. It's just not my background. Anyways, who to follow? I think Ann talked a little bit about who to follow. So, you know, it totally depends on like what you're interested in. Whatever your academic background, there's a whole bunch of other academics on Twitter with that background. There's a whole world, for example, of like insect scientists on Twitter. Because I'll run across these different sciences and I'm like, who knew? Like there's all these like insect groups. I only remember them because they were posting pictures of bugs, and I'm like, okay, and I stopped following these guys. Like, I don't like bugs, and they're really into their bug pictures. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to mute you all. You're doing great, but like, I can't look at stink bugs. They freak me out. That's one thing to be a little bit careful about. If your audience isn't into stink bugs. So if you're interested in a topic, you might also see if you can find what the popular hashtags are for that. So like I said, I do a lot of healthcare research. There's a website called Symplur.com, Symplur. And what they have is a healthcare hashtag project. And what it is they kind of curate all healthcare related hashtags. So if there's a health topic, you can do a search and it'll show you all the relevant hashtags related to that topic. So let's say you did that for breast cancer, one of the most popular hashtags that would turn up is BCSM, which stands for breast cancer social media. And I just pulled kind of a little thread from that, and you can see who's tweeting with that hashtag. You've got a mix of patients, advocates, orgs, doctors, researchers. It's kind of interesting to see like who are in these conversations. So that's another way to find community is through hashtags. There's also a website called Hashtagify Me, if you don't do health research, that you can do keyword searches to find hashtags on any topic. I was just talking to someone earlier today and they said, I really want to study health disparities. I want to understand how minorities are using Twitter. And I said, well, are you aware of Black Twitter? There's Black Twitter. And if you want to find those conversations in that community, you'll need to find what hashtags are being used in that. So it may not come up in your feed depending on what you're following, but it's there and you have to do a little work to find it. But those communities are there. But Twitter is enormous, so you have to kind of do a little work to find it. What is your feed? Like I said, be a resource. What I do is I tweet what I read, think, and do. So I was coming here today, and I want people to know that I do, a little work on social media. I do some training, so I posted about it. Here are some other examples of, like, I post articles that I read, so on and so forth. Talked about finding followers. Building an audience on Twitter, way easier. Because there is a little bit of a follow back policy on Twitter where, people who are, like regular people will follow you back. Like Katy Perry's not gonna follow you back, or Donald Trump, or, famous people won't follow you back. But most people who are kind of like on our equal ground, like, will follow you back. And so the more people you follow, the more you can build a following. And so when I first started out, I had this habit of like follow 10 new people a day. And then it just started snowballing. The more you tweet, it brings followers to you, because then your followers are retweeting and bringing your tweet to a new audience. And occasionally you'll have a tweet that does really good, and then you'll be like, whoa, I just got like 10 followers from that tweet, that's crazy. And so you can see like this, it can snowball really easily. But you have to be engaging and providing content for that to happen. In terms of the perfect tweet, when you're tweeting science, I would avoid jargon and make sure that your headline, or what's the content of your tweet, anybody could understand. So I avoid titles of articles. You know how we name our research articles and like we understand it, but like the rest of the world would be like, what does that mean? So I try to avoid the title of the article, and sometimes I'll just kind of come up with what the nugget is of the article, of like, well, what's the bottom line of this article? Or if there's like a money quote in the article, I'll be like, I'm just gonna tweet that, and then link the article. So I talk about be relevant and be timely, but I also want to mention be useful. So make sure that your Twitter feed people are finding to be useful, as opposed to like ranty or something like that. It's easy to go down that road. There are a lot of people who are going down that road. I want to make sure we have some time for questions, so I'm going to pause and see if there are questions that have popped up. Yep.
How do you navigate through, like, let's say, like, all the, like, the robot followers and stuff? Like, just my experience on Instagram, if I like, a few different posts, or if I'm talking with some certain people who might have public profiles, all of a sudden I've got 15 or 20 like requests, and you're like, I don't even know if this is legit or not. How do you deal with that when you're trying to run a department?
Yeah, so I don't follow them back if they don't seem like useful to me. So you can just leave it. I had a phase where I was getting a lot of spam followers, and so I started to block them because I was worried that it might make me look bad to have so many spam followers. And so it was like hugely tedious to go and block them, because if you block them, then they can't follow you. But unless it became an issue where there were like hundreds of them, I would just sort of leave them alone. Because it can be time consuming to just go through and like block. I mean, they're harmless. If they start trolling you, then I would block them. Other questions? Let's see. What about politics? I thought I would address that, because sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know if I should get into politics. I definitely get political on Twitter because of what this guy says, which I think means a lot to me. So if something matters, I'm gonna talk about it. Pitfalls on Twitter. If you engage enough, somebody's gonna argue with you or say something nasty to you. So it depends on how you want to handle it. If it's a legit person, I will have a conversation if they're not like doing ad hominem attacks. If it's just somebody who's being a jerk, then I will usually block them and I won't engage them. A long time ago, I used to get into these things and I would engage people and I'd be like, why am I doing this? So now I just block them. I'm like, you're done. We're done. So another issue that comes up is feeling like you have to generate content and like getting stressed out about it. In that case, I would try to think more about what you're already doing and the papers and activities that you're doing that you could be pushing out that wouldn't create you having to go on a search for content all the time. Like, that might be a little bit more challenging if you're running a department, and less challenging if you're just doing a feed on your own, because as an academic, you're probably reading a lot of research papers all the time, so you can just be like, tweet, tweet. Here are two great resources around, one is from Mayo Clinic, one is from another social media influencer. These are great books around that give you a lot of guidance too, that I would recommend. Other questions? I think we're at time. Did we end at 20 after?
We get a 20 after. The next event is until 2:30, so if there are questions.
Okay, yeah, so I'm happy to ask any, or answer any questions, even if they're real specific. All right, well, I hope to see you on Twitter. Here's me on Twitter, that's me, and those are my center. Follow our Facebook page, doesn't have trouble with followers. So, this is my effort. That's what whenever you do talks, honestly, post your page, because you'll get followers from them. So, another little trick. All right.
Thank you very much.